My dear friend, it is not my custom to speak at these concerts, except occasionally on a Thursday evening, but we are embarking on a series of such unusual interest and perhaps complexity that I feel a few words may be in order. During these next 6 weeks, we shall be examining music of our time and, in a sense, music of the future, in the sense of whatever clues we can find in this music that point to the new directions music is taking. Now, that music has a future, nobody will deny, but the nature of it is a question perhaps more crucial now than at any time in the history of music. These days, changes and fads come and go with such startling rapidity that we can hardly follow them. There are even those who claim that half the avant-garde music we shall be playing these next weeks is already old-fashioned. We live in a time of anxious confusion. Hoaxes are easily perpetrated. Everybody and nobody seems to be an authority on the subject. Serialism and electronics are jostling each other for first place in the race, and chance or random music and jazz improvisation try to make a peaceful coexistence, often fail and often try again. Some new music has reached a mathematical complexity that staggers the mind, whereas other new music has reverted to a semi-idiotic simplicity where two notes spaced a minute apart can constitute a sonata, or for that matter, even to the neo-Dada notion of no notes at all. Or in some extreme cases, the notion of dropping a herring down into a tuba and calling it a musical happening or moment or event, or conceivably a sonata for herring and tuba. In all this mass of truth and falsehood, of sincere striving and ambitious chicanery, there must be some constants, some invariables, and in fact some music of importance or charm or even of beauty. And believing this, we have scheduled this series of works which are the best and most representative examples we could find of what is now going on. Obviously, we couldn't make a complete survey, especially within the limitations of a subscription series, but I myself am amazed that we can survey even as much as we have planned. There are a few really unfortunate omissions. Stockhausen, for example, any one of whose few orchestral works, they are very few, would require more weeks of preparation than our symphonic society has at its disposal. Another conspicuous absence is that of Gunther Schuller, who represents the third stream, combining jazz and serious elements, so-called serious elements. I deeply regret that absence, but we can do only so much. And even to do this much, the gentlemen of the orchestra are already extending themselves far beyond the call of duty, and I think they deserve our abiding gratitude. Throughout this survey, you'll find one thing that all the new pieces have in common, and that is that not one of them is tonal in the old Beethovenian sense of key, or even in the more liberal sense of Hindemith's or Bartók's tonality. Something seems to have changed qualitatively in music. It's not just a quantitative change, like the music becoming more dissonant or less tonal. It is a completely qualitative change, the root of which is the total demise of tonality. Now, of course, there are some reactionary composers still hanging around who cling arduously to the old beloved F majors and modulatory harmonies, but they are not considered as part of the future by the avant-garde. Who actually does belong to the future is a question we can perhaps answer better 6 weeks from now, after we have visited some of the far-out planets. I feel also that something else even more basic has changed in music of our time and in all art of our time as well. And that began to happen on that day in August 1945 when a bomb fell on Hiroshima. Since that atomic moment, we have been forced to accept, finally, reluctantly, and hundreds of years late, the truth of the Copernican revolution, which tells us that man is no longer the center of the universe or of infinity. The stars are not up above us. The sun is not in the east or in the west. There isn't any up or east or west. There is space. And somewhere in space there is a speck we call Earth, along with innumerable other specks, and that this speck is inhabited by what we call life, and that life is capable of creating new life. That's not an easy revolution to accept, proof of which is that it's taken us so long. Now, this is no moment to go into the metaphysics of this revolution. It's enough to say that we have begun to perceive it in our time, and the results in the arts are extraordinary. The main change seems to be that man's ego is no longer the inner motor of a work of art the way it used to be. The hero artist no longer exists. The Beethoven, the Wagner, the Berlioz, that romantic notion of the hero as artist. And modern art these days seems to be a collection of anti-novels and non-poems, un-pictures, and no plays. I don't mean the Japanese no plays. And these works are so described by their creators, not just by antipathetic critics. Now, whether this is good or bad is not for me to say, or for anyone to say yet, although the miles of print on the subject extend from here to Mars. But in all this discussion, pro and con, one thing is clear, that the modern artist is, at least temporarily, in the process of abdicating his personal will, his ego, his personality. And in some way, he has begun to relate to space rather than to his fellow man. Now, the two pieces we are going to hear now are clear examples of this. Of course, since they were not written 5 minutes ago, they may already be passé and not indicative at all of what is really new. The Xenakis piece, for example, was written way back in 1956, which makes it practically prehistoric from the avant-garde point of view. And Ligeti, who wrote his strangely beautiful Atmosphère in 1961, a bare 2 years ago, is now, I am told, engaged in writing a work for massed metronomes. As you see, it's, in all seriousness, it's very hard to keep up with the times. But I am as sure as anyone can be these days that these two works we're about to hear are central to our times and relevant to the revolution that is taking place in the arts. It's all too easy to laugh off this revolution as a passing fancy or ambitious nonsense. In truth, it may be ambitious nonsense, but I rather doubt it. In any case, we have the obligation to find out, and I hope you all have the curiosity and adventurousness to come along with us in our search, in all seriousness and good faith. Now, a short word about Pithoprakta by Xenakis, which we are going to hear first. This piece is written for a string orchestra only, and though you may find it hard to believe, all the sounds you will hear are made only by string instruments, with 3 exceptions. There's an occasional smack on the wood block, and at one point the strings are joined by some low growling trombones, and then there are some code-like messages rapped out on the xylophone. Outside of these, all the peculiar sounds you're going to hear are produced by stringed instruments, which ring every possible change on their instruments. They turn them over and tap on the backs of them. They bow the instruments with the wood of the bow instead of with the hair. They play on the bridge, on the fingerboard. They pluck and rub and beat the strings and use all kinds of glissandi, harmonics, and bowing mechanisms. And most of these things are not absolutely new. Most of these sounds have been heard, but perhaps not all together in one piece, as you're going to. But the really new aspect of this piece is that each player has his own separate and distinct part. There's no such thing as a first violin section or a cello section or a viola section. Every player is a soloist with a separate part of his own to play, so that there are a total of 46 different string parts being played at once, and all being controlled by a series of highly advanced mathematical formulae. It's like a piece of gigantic chamber music. And of course, no human conductor can possibly hear all those different notes and check on them, nor in fact could Mr. Xenakis himself, I believe, if he were here. Therefore, every member of the orchestra is on the honor system. But I trust them, and so must you, as we must all trust the composer himself. But quite seriously, this is exactly the sense in which the composer has abdicated his ego. He has written a huge and vastly complex work, carefully planned as if by an IBM computer, to wind up sounding, of all things, like a mass improvisation by the orchestra. It is not in any way an improvisation. It has that effect in the end. And you may well ask, why? Why not just let them improvise? And in that question, my friends, lies the fascinating mystery of what is going on now in modern music. Perhaps in listening to the music, you can begin to find an answer. Whatever your reaction, I'm glad it's mixed. There's nothing as lively as a little controversy. I don't know about you, I find this piece extremely impressive, and the main impression I get from it, strangely enough, is one of immobility, non-movement, which is strange since the actual music is filled with movement, an extraordinary amount of it, in fact, as any player in the orchestra can testify. But the total result seems somehow static. It's like the night sky, which we know to be full of objects whirling and orbiting and exploding at great speed, but which to us looks absolutely fixed, stationary. And in this sense, the sense that movement is the essence of music, movement through time, just as the essence of the planets is movement through space, in that sense, what we have just heard could be thought of as a piece of non-music, just as the Beckett plays are referred to as non-plays, or as certain modern novels are said to be about anti-heroes. Now, this static quality in music is not new. It's been around for some time, though it belongs to our century peculiarly. It's been around ever since the first 12-tone experiments of Schoenberg, because even there, with the 12 notes in constant play, we often get the feeling of hearing all the notes all the time, which is necessarily a static idea, even though the play of the notes themselves is wildly dynamic and full of movement.